Sounds like you're planning to expand your operation. Quick pause. Comment where you're watching from, and if you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe. I've got a lot more coming. I am. She looked up at him. But I'll need help. A partner. Someone who believes in what we're building.
Please.
You have one.
We didn't mean
Kale's kiss was soft and sure. Now and always.
So cold.
As night fell over the fortress, Ilara sensed the presence again. The mysterious watcher, the potential threat, the Iron Chain's true master. Still out there. Still planning. But she wasn't afraid. Because she had Kale. She had her bonded beasts. She had a pack who trusted her and young whisperers who looked up to her. She had a purpose that gave meaning to all the pain she'd endured. The Crimson Massacre had taken everything from her. But from those ashes she'd built something beautiful. Something worth protecting. And when the Iron Chain's true master finally revealed themselves, Ilara would be ready. Not as a victim. Not as a monster. But as a guardian. The other children emerged from the corners like ghosts, their faces pressed with the same question. Is he like us? Emily knelt and looked into each of their eyes, the ones who could see her and the ones who stared at nothing, the ones who could speak and the ones who'd gone silent after what had been done to them. 7 now. 7 mouths to feed when she could barely find food for 6. 7 reasons the council would hunt her. 7 children the world had thrown away like garbage. Mara fetched the medical kit. Torin warm water. The rest of you blankets and anything soft. Her voice cut through their fear like a blade through snow, sharp and certain. They scattered to their tasks, and she focused on the boy whose body was tearing itself apart from the inside. She'd seen this before. The forced shift. The compound they called V7, developed in secret by council scientists who believed genetic purity was worth any price. They injected it into pups as young as 3, hoping to trigger early transformations that would reveal weakness. The strong survived. The weak convulsed and died. The ones in between, the ones who shifted wrong or incomplete, ended up here in her arms fighting for every breath. You're safe now, she murmured, knowing it was a lie. Safety was a luxury neither of them could afford. But hope? Hope was free and she'd give it to them even if it killed her. His eyes locked onto hers, human intelligence trapped in a body at war with itself. His mouth moved, trying to form words around fangs that hadn't been there an hour ago. They said, I was broken. They lied. Emily's hands were gentle as she examined him, checking for injuries beyond the obvious trauma of transformation. You're not broken. You're just different. And the difference scares them. Mara appeared at her elbow, the 11-year-old girl who'd been her first rescue, clutching the battered medical kit they'd stolen from a supply depot 6 months ago. Inside were bandages, antibiotics long past their expiration date, and 3 doses of sedative, enough to ease pain, not enough to save anyone. Emily had gotten good at choosing who needed it most. What's your name? She asked the boy, drawing his attention away from the needle she was preparing. Leo. His voice broke on the single syllable, part howl, part sob. Leo Solberg. The medical kit slipped from her fingers and crashed to the floor. Solberg. Royal bloodline. The Alpha King's family name. For 2 years she'd hidden in the shadows, collecting the unwanted, the rejected, the children deemed too weak to live. She'd stolen from supply routes and scavenged in dead zones. She'd learned to move without leaving tracks, to think without making sound, to survive on nothing but determination and stolen scraps. She'd made herself invisible to a kingdom that wanted her dead. And now she'd taken the Alpha King's nephew into her cabin. Torin returned with the water, his eyes wide behind the thick glasses he'd found in the ruins of an abandoned town. At 14 he was the oldest, the one who remembered life before the dead zone, before Emily had found him bleeding out in the snow with a rejection mark burned into his shoulder. He saw the look on her face and went still. What's wrong? His voice was careful, measured, the way people spoke when they already knew the answer would change everything. Emily looked at Leo, at the royal air shivering in her coat, his body rejecting itself because someone had decided he wasn't perfect enough to live. She looked at the other children, the ones who trusted her to keep them alive, who believed her when she said tomorrow would be better than today. She'd built this sanctuary on lies and prayers, and now the truth was going to bring an army to her door. Matteo Solberg wasn't just the Alpha King. He was the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories, a warrior who'd unified fractured packs through strength and strategic violence. When his nephew vanished, he wouldn't send scouts or diplomats. He'd come himself, with his tactical team and thermal drones and the full force of royal authority. And he'd find her. The question wasn't if. It was when, and whether she'd still be alive when he arrived. "Nothing's wrong," she lied, meeting Torin's eyes. He knew she was lying. They both knew. But there were some truths too dangerous to speak aloud, even here in the dead zone where the only witnesses were the wind and the wolves. She injected the sedative into Leo's arm and watched his tortured body slowly relax into unconscious peace. His claws retracted. His breathing steadied. For a moment he looked like any sleeping child, innocent and unbroken. Emily gathered the scattered medical supplies with hands that refused to shake, because if she started shaking she might never stop. Behind her, Mara was already organizing the other children for sleep, her voice low and soothing. They trusted her. They believed her. They had no idea that in saving this one boy, she might have condemned them all. But she couldn't leave him out there to die. She'd never been able to leave any of them. Even if it meant the Alpha King himself would come hunting. Even if it meant the end of everything she'd built. Some choices weren't choices at all. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. And somewhere beyond the dead zone, in a palace built from stone and power and secrets, Matteo Solberg was already tracking the signal from his nephew's implant. Already assembling his team. Already coming. The collision was inevitable. The question was what would be left standing when the dust cleared, her sanctuary or his kingdom, her truth or his power, her fragile hope or his brutal justice. Emily laid the sleeping boy near the fire and pulled the thinnest blanket over his small frame. Outside, the wind howled through the trees like a warning, carrying the scent of distant smoke and something else, something that made her wolf stir uneasily in the cage of her chest. Something that smelled like pine and blood and inevitable destruction. The Alpha King was coming. And she had absolutely no idea how to survive him. Matteo Solberg had killed his first wolf at 14, led his first battalion at 18, and taken the throne at 23 when his father's heart gave out mid-shift. He'd spent the last 7 years holding a fractured kingdom together with strategy, strength, and when necessary, extreme violence. He'd negotiated peace treaties with packs that had been at war for generations. He'd executed traitors in public squares to remind his subjects that mercy had limits. He'd done everything required of an Alpha King. But he'd never been afraid until the moment Leo's tracker went dark in the dead zone. The helicopter cut through pre-dawn darkness, rotors churning snow into violent spirals as they descended toward the coordinates. His tactical team sat in grim silence, 12 of his best fighters, armed with tranquilizers and live rounds, prepared for extraction or elimination depending on what they found. Matteo checked his weapon for the third time, hands steady despite the fury that burned beneath his skin like a second heartbeat. Someone had taken his nephew. Someone would die for it. Thermal scan shows 8 heat signatures in the structure, his second-in-command reported, voice crackling through the headset. 1 adult, 7 juveniles. No defensive positions. No weapons visible. Mattheo's jaw tightened. Leo and 7 others. A trafficking ring then. Children stolen and held for ransom or worse. His wolf snarled inside his chest, demanding blood, demanding violence, demanding justice delivered with teeth and claws. Rules of engagement? The pilot asked. Non-lethal unless provoked. I want whoever's inside alive for questioning. Mattheo's voice was ice wrapped in steel. But if Leo is hurt, there won't be enough left to question. The helicopter touched down 50 yards from the cabin, snow billowing in white clouds that obscured everything. Matthew was the first out, boots hitting frozen ground as his team fanned out in tactical formation. The structure before them was barely standing, rotted wood held together by desperation and spite, windows covered with torn fabric, smoke trickling from a crooked chimney. This was someone's last resort, their final hiding place before the wilderness swallowed them whole. That meant they had nowhere to run. He raised his fist. The team went silent, weapons ready. Then he moved forward with the fluid grace of a predator who'd never learned to doubt his own lethality. The door would be barred from inside. Standard procedure was to blow the hinges and flood the room with flashbangs, overwhelming resistance before it could organize. But something made him pause with his hand on the detonator. A sound, barely audible over the helicopter's dying rotors. Singing. A woman's voice, rough and untrained, humming a lullaby that belonged to the old world, the one before packs and territories and genetic purity laws. His mother had sung it to him once, a lifetime ago, before politics and duty had turned her into a stranger who smiled for cameras and poisoned rivals at dinner parties. Matthew's finger hesitated on the trigger. Then he kicked the door open instead. The scene inside should have been chaos, screaming, scrambling, desperate attempts to use the children as shields. That's what kidnappers did when cornered. That's what every tactical manual predicted. Instead, he found a woman standing between his guns and 7 children arranged behind her like a wall of defiance built from scrap wood and sheer will. She was exactly what the dead zone produced. Gaunt, exhausted, wearing clothes that had been patched so many times the original fabric was a memory. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves past her shoulders, framing a face that was all sharp angles and hollow shadows. She should have been cowering. Should have been begging. She was baring her teeth at an alpha king and 12 armed wolves like she actually believed she could stop them. You can't have them. Her voice was hoarse, probably from cold, probably from screaming into the void for help that never came. I don't care who you are or what authority you think you have. You can't have them. Matthew's wolf stirred, confused. Kidnappers didn't protect their merchandise. Traffickers didn't stand between children and rescue. His tactical brain cataloged details with ruthless efficiency. No weapons within reach, no escape routes, no backup plan. She was going to die defending these kids and she knew it and she was doing it anyway. Stupid. Brave. Suicidal. He's kind of crazy. Where's Leo Solberg? He demanded, weapon trained on her center mass even as something in his chest twisted uncomfortably. She didn't flinch. Most wolves flinched when the Alpha King pointed a gun at them. This woman looked at him like he was a problem she'd figure out how to solve, given enough time and motivation. Sleeping. She jerked her chin toward a small form curled near the dying fire, wrapped in a coat that was too large and too thin. Sedated. He came here sick and I treated him. That's not a crime. Kidnapping is. I didn't kidnap anyone. Her eyes flashed amber in the lamplight. Omega, his wolf supplied unhelpfully as if he couldn't see that for himself. They come to me because they have nowhere else to go. Because your council decided they weren't worth saving. The words hit like a slap. What council? She laughed, sharp and bitter as the wind outside. Don't play stupid. It doesn't suit you, Alpha King. You know exactly what happens to pups who fail the tests. You know where they go when they disappear from pack registries. You know, and you do nothing because maintaining order is more important than protecting children. Matthew's finger tightened on the trigger. You don't know what you're talking about. Then why is your nephew here? She took a step forward, suicidal and fearless. Why did a 7-year-old royal heir run to a rejected Omega in the dead zone instead of seeking protection from his family? Behind her, one of the children whimpered. She immediately shifted, putting herself between Matthew and the sound, hands spread wide like she could physically shield them from bullets with nothing but flesh and determination. And that's when it happened. She reached out, instinctive, trying to push him back to create more space between the threat and the vulnerable. Her palm connected with his chest, warm despite the cold, solid despite how fragile she looked. The mate bond snapped into place like a bear trap closing on his soul. Matthew staggered backward, weapon dropping to his side as the world tilted on its axis. Omega. Fated mate. The bond roared through his veins like fire, like recognition, like coming home to a place he'd never known existed. His wolf howled in triumph, in possession, in absolute certainty that this woman, this infuriating, suicidal, magnificent woman, belonged to him. She felt it too. He saw it in the way her pupils dilated, in the sharp intake of breath, in the way her hand jerked back like she'd touched molten metal. Horror and understanding warred across her face. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. What's your name?" Matthew's voice came out rough, barely human. She shook her head, stepping back, putting distance between them even though the bond stretched like elastic, pulling them together. "It doesn't matter. Take Leo and go. Forget you found this place. Forget you found us." "I can't do that. You're the Alpha King. You can do anything you want." She was trembling now, but not from fear. From the bond. From fighting every instinct that screamed at her to submit, to accept, to trust. "Take your nephew home. Leave us here. We'll disappear, I promise. You'll never see us again." Matthew looked past her to the children. Really looked this time with more than tactical assessment. They were thin, all of them, the kind of starvation thin that took months to achieve. Their clothes were mismatched, salvaged, held together with hope. But they were clean. Their hair was braided or combed. Their faces, despite the fear, held something he rarely saw in the dead zone. They held hope. This woman had kept 7 children alive in the most hostile environment in the Northern Territories. She'd fed them and clothed them and sung them to sleep. She'd given them something worth living for. And she'd done it alone. Emily Hvidston. His second-in-command stepped forward, tablet in hand. Rejected Omega. Disappeared from the Western Pack registries 2 years ago after Alpha Liam Volkov terminated their mate bond. Presumed dead. He paused. "There's a warrant for her arrest. Emily." Her name tasted like destiny on his tongue. She lifted her chin, defiant even now. "Then arrest me. But let the children go first. They haven't done anything wrong." "They're witnesses to your crimes," his second said, voice flat and professional. "They're children," Emily snarled, and Matthew's wolf perked up at the sound, at the Omega protecting her pack with nothing but fury and foolish courage. "Children your precious council tried to kill. Children I saved from medical experiments and forced shifts and execution. You want to arrest someone? Arrest the monsters who injected them with V7. Arrest the counselors who approved the Genetic Purity Act. Arrest the Alpha King who was too busy maintaining political stability to notice his own people were being slaughtered." The cabin went deadly silent. Matthew met her eyes, Omega gold to Alpha silver, and saw no deception. Only exhaustion. Only the truth. Only a woman who'd burned herself to ashes keeping others warm. "Stand down," he ordered his team. "Sir." "Stand down." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. The tactical team lowered their weapons, confused but obedient. Matthew holstered his own and took a step toward his fated mate, his impossible mate, his infuriating mate who just accused him of complicity in crimes he'd never heard of. "You're coming with me," he said quietly. "All of you. To the palace. So you can execute us somewhere more comfortable? So I can find out if you're telling the truth." He looked at the children, at Leo sleeping by the fire, at the evidence of survival against impossible odds. "And if you are, someone is going to pay for it." Emily searched his face for the lie, for the trap. She found something else instead, something that terrified her more than threats or weapons. She found belief. "Why would you help us?" she whispered. Matthew smiled, sharp and dangerous as broken glass. "Because you're my mate. And if someone hurts what's mine, they're going to learn exactly why the Northern Territories fear me. The bond hummed between them, inevitable and unwanted and absolutely undeniable. Outside, dawn broke over the dead zone, painting snow in shades of blood and gold. The collision had happened. Now came the explosion. The palace was built from mountain stone and old violence, a fortress that had stood for 3 centuries through wars and plagues and the collapse of human civilization. Emily had seen it once before years ago, when she'd been young and stupid and believed that being chosen by an alpha meant safety. She'd stood in the courtyard as Liam's intended mate, wearing borrowed finery and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, trying to convince herself that duty could become love if she just tried hard enough. The rejection had happened in a room with marble floors that echoed when she fell to her knees, begging him to reconsider. He'd looked at her with pity and disgust, 2 emotions that tasted the same when mixed with shame. She'd sworn she'd never return. Sworn she'd rather die in the dead zone than crawl back to the palace that had witnessed her humiliation. And yet here she was, walking through gates she'd never thought she'd see again, following an alpha king who was her fated mate and her jailer in equal measure. The children pressed close, Mara gripping her hand with fingers that trembled despite her brave face. Leo walked beside Matthew, his small body exhausted from the shift and the sedatives, but his eyes sharp with an intelligence that made Emily's chest ache. He was 7 and he'd already learned not to trust the people who were supposed to protect him. They all had. Wolves lined the corridors, guards, servants, courtiers, staring at the bedraggled group like they'd dragged something feral and dangerous into civilized space. Maybe they had. Emily kept her chin up and her shoulders back, refusing to shrink beneath their judgment. She'd survived worse than their contempt. She'd survived this too. Matthew led them to the guest wing, not the dungeons. That was something at least. The rooms were warm, almost obscenely so after years in the cabin where frost formed on the inside of windows. There were beds with clean sheets, a bathroom with running water, clothes laid out in sizes that roughly matched the children's measurements. "Everything you need is here," Matthew said, his voice carefully neutral. The mate bond stretched between them like a living thing, pulling and insistent, but he didn't acknowledge it. Professional. Distant. The Alpha King conducting business. Food will be brought up. Don't leave these rooms without an escort. Are we prisoners? Emily asked. His eyes met hers, silver and storm gray and far too knowing. You're under my protection. That's not the same thing. Feels similar from where I'm standing. A muscle ticked in his jaw. If you were my prisoner, Emily, you'd know it. Her name in his mouth sounded like ownership, like a claim he hadn't yet made but fully intended to. This is temporary. Until I verify your accusations. And then we'll see. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. The children will be examined by our medical team. Non-invasively, he added when she tensed. I need to document their conditions. For evidence. Evidence. He was actually going to investigate. Emily didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of hope blooming in her chest after so long in the frozen dark. Matthew. His name felt foreign on her tongue, too intimate for what they were to each other. Fated mates who were strangers, allies who were enemies, 2 people connected by biology and divided by everything else. If you're lying to me, if this is some elaborate trap. It's not. I'll find a way to make you regret it. He smiled then, sharp and appreciative. I believe you. Then he was gone, the door closing with a finality that sounded like a cell door locking. The children collapsed onto beds like soldiers after a long campaign, their small bodies finally surrendering to exhaustion. Only Torin remained standing, his expression carefully blank in that way that meant he was cataloging exits and counting enemies. This is bad, he said quietly. I know. He's the Alpha King. I know. And your fated mate. Emily pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to hold back the scream building in her throat. I know. What are we going to do? That was the question, wasn't it? What could they do? Run. They'd never make it past the gates. Fight. They'd be dead before they drew blood. Trust? Trust had gotten her rejected and broken and left for dead. But Matthew had felt the mate bond and he hadn't forced it. He'd brought them to guest rooms instead of dungeons. He'd promised to investigate instead of executing them for treason. Either he was playing a long game she didn't understand, or he was actually considering the possibility that she was telling the truth. Both options terrified her. "We wait," she said finally. "We play along. We gather information. And if this goes wrong, we take the children and we run so far and so fast that even the Alpha King can't find us." Torin nodded, satisfied with a plan that was barely a plan at all. He was 14 and he'd learned to accept that survival was about adapting to whatever fresh horror came next. A knock on the door made them both tense. Emily moved to answer it, positioning herself so she could slam it shut if necessary. Instead, she found a woman in a crisp uniform holding a tray laden with more food than Emily had seen in months. "Compliments of the Alpha King," the woman said, her expression carefully neutral. "He said to make sure the children eat first." The children. Not the prisoners. Not the criminals. The children. Emily accepted the tray with hands that wanted to shake. "Thank you." The woman hesitated. "I have a daughter," she said quietly. "She's 6. If someone hurt her, if someone threw her away because she wasn't perfect." Her voice trailed off, but her eyes said what her words couldn't. "I hope you're telling the truth. I hope he burns them all down." Then she was gone, leaving Emily standing in the doorway with the scent of fresh bread and cooked meat making her stomach clench with desperate hunger. They ate. Gods, they ate. The children devoured everything with the single-minded focus of the chronically starved, stuffing food into their mouths like someone might take it away. Emily forced herself to eat slowly, to savor each bite, to remember that this might be the last good meal they ever had. Halfway through, the door opened again. No knock this time. Just Matthew striding in like he owned the place, which technically he did, his expression dark and dangerous. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. Of course they did. "Alpha Liam Volkov is here with 3 high counselors. They're demanding your arrest. They have warrants signed and sealed, charging you with kidnapping, treason, and conspiracy against the crown." His eyes met hers and she saw fury there, banked but burning. "They want you executed at dawn." The bread turned to ash in Emily's mouth. Liam. His name tasted like poison. Her former mate, the Alpha who'd rejected her and then hunted her for having the audacity to survive. Of course he was here. Of course he wanted her dead. She knew too much, had seen too much, had saved too many children who were supposed to disappear quietly into unmarked graves. "He claims you kidnapped Leo to extort money from the royal family," Matthew continued, his voice tight with controlled rage. "He claims you're mentally unstable, that the rejection broke your mind, that you've been stealing children to replace the pups you'll never have." It was a good story. Plausible. Sympathetic even. A rejected Omega went mad with grief, lashing out at the world that had discarded her. The council would eat it up. "You don't believe that," Emily said. It wasn't a question. No. Matthew moved closer, his presence filling the room like a storm front. "But I'm one voice against 3 counselors and an Alpha with significant political influence. If I refuse to turn you over, they'll claim I'm compromised by the mate bond. They'll call for a vote of no confidence. They might succeed. Then turn me over." The words came out steady, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs like it wanted to escape before the rest of her died. "Let them execute me. But get the children to safety first. Please." She hated how her voice broke on that last word. Hated begging. Hated that after everything she was still asking an Alpha to save her. Matthew's eyes flashed silver. "That's not happening. You just said." "I said they want you executed. I didn't say I was going to allow it." He closed the distance between them, crowding into her space until she could feel the heat radiating off his skin, smell pine and gunpowder and something wild and electric. "You're my mate. My responsibility. My problem to solve. And I don't surrender what's mine. The possessiveness should have made her angry. Should have made her push him away, reject the claim before he could solidify it. Instead, something in her chest loosened just a fraction, like a fist that had been clenched for so long it had forgotten how to open. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. Matthew smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had made his enemies surrender rather than face him on the battlefield. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want. A trial. Public, official, with every counselor and alpha in attendance." He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he was 3 moves from solving. "You said the council is covering up medical experiments on children. Prove it. Tell your story where they can't silence you. Force them to answer for their crimes in front of witnesses who can't be disappeared." It was insane. It was brilliant. It was probably going to get them all killed. "They'll never let me speak," Emily said. "They'll cut me off, declare me unfit to testify. Not if you're the Alpha King's fated mate making a formal accusation of treason against sitting counselors." His hand came up, hovering just shy of touching her face, asking permission. "Not if I claim you publicly before the trial. Not if I make it clear that attacking you is attacking the crown." Emily's breath caught. Claiming meant accepting the mate bond. Meant marking her, binding them together in a way that couldn't be undone. Meant trusting an alpha with her life when the last one had shattered her. "You don't even know me," she managed. "I know you kept 7 children alive in the dead zone when anyone else would have left them to die. I know you stood between my guns and there's like you actually thought you could stop me. I know you're brave and reckless and absolutely infuriating." His voice dropped to something rough and intimate. "And I know that if you're telling the truth about the council, they need to pay. And if you're lying..." He paused. "Then I'll deal with that when it comes. You'd claim me even if you think I might be lying? The mate bond doesn't lie, Emily. You're mine. Everything else is just details we'll figure out together." It was the worst proposal she'd ever heard. No romance, no promises, just strategy and possession and a ruthless Alpha King deciding she was worth the political fallout. It was also the first time in 2 years anyone had chosen her. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Okay, we do it your way. But when this goes wrong..." "If this goes wrong," Matthew interrupted, "I'll make sure you and the children get out. That's a promise." Before she could respond, he turned and strode toward the door, already barking orders into a comm unit. Planning. Strategizing. Building a war around her truth like it was worth burning his kingdom down for. Maybe it was. Tomorrow they'd face the council. Tomorrow she'd tell the world what had been done to innocence in the name of genetic purity. Tomorrow she'd either save the children or die trying. Tonight, she had a warm bed and full bellies around her and an Alpha King willing to go to war for a mate he barely knew. It wasn't safe. It wasn't freedom. But it was more than she dared hope for in a very long time. Outside the window, the palace glittered against the night sky, a fortress built to protect power, about to become the battlefield where truth and corruption would collide. Emily pulled Mara close and whispered a promise into the darkness. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we survive. That's what we do. We survive." In the shadows, Torin nodded agreement. And somewhere in the palace, Liam Volkov sharpened his arguments, preparing to bury the woman who dared to escape him. The trial would be brutal. The revelations would be devastating. The fallout would reshape the kingdom. But Emily Hvidston had spent 2 years in the dead zone keeping hope alive with nothing but stubbornness and stolen supplies. She wasn't about to surrender now. The throne room had been built to intimidate, with vaulted ceilings that swallowed sound and stone pillars carved with the names of fallen warriors. Every alpha in the Northern Territory stood in attendance, their power filling the space like static electricity before a storm. The High Council sat in elevated seats, 3 ancient wolves who'd held their positions through 4 different kings, their faces carefully neutral masks that hid calculations sharp as knives. And there, among the witnesses, stood Alpha Liam Volkov. Her former mate. The man who'd rejected her and then tried to erase the evidence of his crimes by hunting her through the dead zone. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a cold, cruel way, with dark hair and darker eyes that had once made her believe she could be loved. She knew better now. Emily stood in the center of the room with Matthew at her side, his presence a solid wall between her and the wolves who wanted her dead. He'd claimed her at dawn in a private ceremony that had been more military strategy than romance. A bite to the juncture of her neck and shoulder, quick and clinical, sealing the mate bond before anyone could object. The mark burned under her borrowed dress, a brand that declared her the Alpha King's mate and therefore untouchable under pack law. At least that was the theory. "We are here," announced Counselor Henrik, his voice carrying the weight of authority and age, to address the charges against Emily Hvidston, formerly of the Western Pack. Kidnapping. Conspiracy against the Crown. Treason. He paused, his cold eyes finding hers. And the unlawful harboring of genetically defective specimens designated for termination under the Genetic Purity Act. Specimens. Not children. Not people. Specimens. Emily's hands clenched into fists. Beside her, Matthew's jaw tightened, the only sign of his rage. "The accused has made counter-allegations," Henrik continued, claiming that members of this council and various pack alphas have engaged in illegal medical experimentation on minors. "These are serious accusations that undermine the stability of our government and the integrity of our laws." His voice sharpened. "They are also, I suspect, the desperate lies of a woman facing execution for her crimes." Murmurs rippled through the assembled alphas. Agreement. Condemnation. Emily was already convicted in their eyes. "She's mine," Matthew said quietly, but his voice carried through the stone chamber like a thunderclap. "My fated mate. Claimed and marked according to pack law. Any accusations against her are accusations against the Crown. Any execution order would be considered an act of war against your Alpha King." He paused, letting the threat settle. "Choose your next words carefully, Counselor." Henrik's smile was thin and humorless. "We have no quarrel with you, Your Majesty. Only with the criminal who has manipulated the sacred mate bond to escape justice. Surely you can see she's using you? I can see a woman who kept 7 children alive in impossible conditions," Matthew interrupted. "I can see evidence of medical intervention that no civilian should have access to. I can see scared pups who bear the marks of forced transformation." His eyes swept the council. "What I can't see is why no one reported these children missing. Why don't their names appear in any pack registries? Why, according to my investigation, they don't officially exist." Silence crashed through the room like a physical thing. "Because they're defective," Alpha Liam said, stepping forward with the confidence of a man who believed he held the superior position. "Genetic waste. Pups who failed the assessment tests, who showed signs of instability or weakness. The Genetic Purity Act authorizes their termination to protect the integrity of our bloodlines." He gestured dismissively toward Emily. "She stole them from authorized facilities. She interfered with legal proceedings. She's a criminal who uses children as shields." "I saved them," Emily said, her voice cutting through the throne room with surprising strength. "I saved them from your illegal experiments. From the compound you call V7 that you inject into 3-year-olds to force early transformations. From the medical procedures that kill half the pups and mutate the rest." She turned to face the assembled alphas, meeting their eyes one by one. "You want to know why these children don't exist in your registries? Because you erased them. Because admitting they survived your attempts to kill them would expose the conspiracy." "This is madness," Henrik declared. "The ravings of a disturbed woman." "Then explain, Leo Solberg." Matthew's voice was ice-wrapped in fury. "Explain why my nephew, a royal heir, not some defective specimen, was found in her care recovering from a forced shift. Explain why he ran to a stranger in the dead zone instead of seeking help from his own family." The council chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Leo's disappearance had been kept quiet, a family matter not meant for public consumption. Now it was center stage and the questions it raised were devastating. Liam's expression flickered, just for a moment, just enough to reveal the calculation beneath his concern. The boy was confused, traumatized. He didn't understand what was happening. He understood perfectly, Emily interrupted. He understood that the medical assessment his uncle authorized was actually an injection of V7. He understood that the doctors weren't trying to help him, they were trying to trigger a shift that would either make him stronger or kill him. He understood that his own family had handed him over to people who saw him as an experiment. She took a breath, steady despite the fear screaming through her veins. And he ran. Just like all the others ran. Because children know when adults are trying to hurt them. Where is he? Counselor Astor demanded. Where is Leo Solberg now? Safe, Matthew said flatly. Under medical supervision at an undisclosed location. Along with the other 6 children who are currently being examined by independent physicians I trust. Physicians who will testify to their findings. Henrik stood, his face flushed with anger. You had no right. I am the Alpha King, Matthew snarled, and his wolf rose in his voice, dominant and deadly. I have every right to investigate crimes committed in my territory. Every right to protect children from predators who hide behind laws and council positions. Every right to burn this entire system down if it's rotten at the foundation. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Liam stepped forward again, playing his final card. Your Majesty, I understand your mate has influenced your judgment. The bond can cloud reason, especially when newly formed. But the facts remain. These children are defective. They pose a danger to pack integrity. The Genetic Purity Act exists to prevent the degradation of our species. They're not defective. Emily's voice rang out, clear and certain. They're evolving. Every eye in the room locked on her. The children you're trying to kill aren't weak, she continued, the words pouring out like water through a cracked dam. They're developing abilities your tests can't measure. Torin can see heat signatures through walls. Mara can hear heartbeats from across a building. Leo's transformation isn't unstable. It's adaptive, allowing him to shift partially instead of being locked into one form. She looked at the council, at Liam, at every alpha who'd signed off on the murders of innocents. You're not eliminating genetic waste. You're murdering the next stage of wolf evolution because you're terrified of change. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Henrik laughed, a cold, calculated sound. Evolution. How convenient. The criminal presents the unprovable defense. He turned to the assembled alphas. She admits to stealing the children. She admits to hiding them from legal authorities. She even admits to interfering with sanctioned medical procedures. The fact that she's invented a justification doesn't change her guilt. It's not invented, Matthew said quietly. Too quietly. My physicians have confirmed unusual neural development in all 7 children. Abilities that don't conform to standard wolf traits. Genetic markers that suggest dormant evolutionary potential activated by extreme stress. He pulled out a tablet, calling up files and images. V7 doesn't cause transformations. It causes trauma. Severe enough to trigger ancient survival mechanisms coded into our DNA. You're not purifying the species, you're torturing children in the hope that the survivors will develop abilities you can weaponize. The throne room erupted in chaos. Alphas shouting questions, demanding answers, turning on the council with fury and horror. Henrik tried to restore order, but the damage was done. The secret was out. The conspiracy was exposed. And Liam, trapped between confession and denial, made the fatal choice. He shifted. Mid-throne room, surrounded by witnesses, he let his wolf take over. A massive black beast with eyes that burned amber with rage and fear and desperate violence. He lunged not at Matthew, not at the council, but at the one person whose testimony could destroy him completely. He lunged at Emily. Matteo moved with the fluid speed of an alpha king who'd never lost a fight. He intercepted Liam mid-leap, shifting mid-air, silver and black colliding in a savage tangle of teeth and claws. They hit the ground hard, marble cracking beneath their combined weight, and then there was no more strategy, no more politics, just two alphas fighting for dominance and survival. Emily scrambled backward as wolves scattered, giving the combatants room. This was primal law, older than councils and courts. When an alpha attacked the king's mate, only blood could answer. Matteo was bigger, stronger, and absolutely merciless. He tore into Liam with methodical brutality, not the wild fury of rage but the calculated violence of a warrior who knew exactly where to bite to cause maximum damage. Liam fought back desperately, but he was already losing, already bleeding out on marble floors that had witnessed 1,000 dominance fights. It ended with Mattheo's jaws locked around Liam's throat, his weight pinning the other alpha's wolf to the ground. Submit or die. The choice was instant and obvious. Liam shifted back to human, hands raised in surrender, blood streaming from a dozen wounds. Mercy, he gasped. I yield. You tried to kill my mate, Matteo snarled, still in wolf form, his voice distorted but understandable. You ordered experiments on children. You covered up murders. His jaws tightened just enough to draw fresh blood. Give me one reason I shouldn't end you right here. I can give you names, Liam wheezed. Everyone involved. Every alpha, every counselor, every facility. Everything you need to burn it all down. He coughed, the sound wet and painful. Just let me live. Matteo shifted back, naked and covered in blood that belonged to both of them. Put him in the dungeons, he ordered the guards. And give me those names. All of them. As they dragged Liam away, Matteo turned to the High Council. Henrik, Astrid, and Boris, three ancient wolves who'd held power for decades, who'd shaped laws and policies, who'd signed the death warrants for countless children in the name of genetic purity. Resign, Matteo said flatly. Effective immediately. Or I'll have you arrested for treason and conspiracy to commit murder. You can't, Henrik started. I can. I am. And if you fight me on this, I'll make sure your trials are public and your families bear the shame of your crimes for generations. Mattheo's eyes were silver fire. Resign with dignity or be dragged out in chains. Choose. One by one they stood. One by one they removed the symbols of their office. And one by one, they walked out of the throne room that had been their seat of power, leaving behind a kingdom in chaos and an alpha king determined to rebuild it from scratch. Emily stood in the center of it all, trembling with adrenaline and shock in something that might have been hope. She'd done it. She'd spoken the truth where they couldn't silence her. She'd exposed the conspiracy. She'd survived. Matteo crossed to her, still bloody, still magnificent, and pulled her into an embrace that felt like safety and possession and promise all tangled together. It's over, he murmured against her hair. You're safe. The children are safe. I've got you. And for the first time in 2 years, Emily believed him. 3 months later, the dead zone cabin stood empty, snow drifting through cracks in the walls and erasing the last traces of desperate survival. Emily stood in the clearing where it had all begun, Mattheo's arm wrapped around her shoulders, and tried to remember the woman who'd scratched out existence in this frozen wasteland. She couldn't quite find her. That woman had been ground down to nothing but survival instinct and protective fury. This woman, the one wearing a crown she'd never wanted and carrying the weight of a kingdom's future, was someone different. Someone who'd learned that strength wasn't about enduring alone but about knowing when to accept help. Are you ready? Matteo asked quietly. She nodded, pulling her coat tighter against the wind. Burn it. He raised his hand and the tactical team moved forward with accelerant and torches. The cabin went up fast, dry wood consuming itself in flames that painted the snow in shades of orange and gold. Emily watched it burn and felt no grief, only relief. That chapter was over. That survival was done. Now came the harder part, building something worth surviving for. The palace had transformed in 3 months. Matthew had kept his promise to burn the old system down, and he'd done it with ruthless efficiency. 18 alphas arrested for crimes against minors. 47 counselors implicated in the V7 program. The Genetic Purity Act repealed and replaced it with protections for children, regardless of their abilities or perceived worth. And the children, the children. Leo was thriving under the care of physicians who actually wanted to help him, his partial transformations becoming more controlled as he learned to trust his own body. Torin had been placed in an advanced education program, his analytical mind finally given challenges worth solving. Mara was learning to read, her fingers tracing words with the same careful attention she'd once used to ration food. All 7 of them were safe, protected, and most importantly, wanted. But the work wasn't finished. Across the Northern Territories, more children were emerging from hiding. More families were coming forward with stories of forced assessments and disappearances. More truths were surfacing about the scope of the conspiracy. And Emily, the rejected Omega who'd been left for dead, was now queen, responsible for healing the wounds her own survival had exposed. She wasn't sure she was qualified. Wasn't sure she deserved it. But Matthew had made it clear that the crown came with the territory of being his mate, and refusing wasn't an option. Besides, the children needed someone who understood what they'd survived. Someone who'd fight for them the way no one had fought for her. So she wore the crown. And she did the work. And slowly, painfully, she learned to believe she might actually belong here. They returned to the palace as the sun set, painting the stone fortress in shades of blood and gold. The courtyard was filled with wolves, not courtiers or politicians but families. Parents who'd thought their children were dead, reunited with pups who'd been hidden in facilities across the territory. Siblings embracing. Grandparents weeping with relief and joy. Matthew had opened the palace for a month-long reconciliation period, allowing families torn apart by the Genetic Purity Act to find each other again. It was chaos, beautiful, messy, hopeful chaos, and Emily loved it. "Your Majesty," a voice called, and Emily turned to find a woman approaching with a small boy clutching her hand. The woman's face was familiar, the servant who'd brought food that first night, the one with a daughter she'd mentioned. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done." Emily shook her head. "I didn't do anything. You saved my nephew." The woman's eyes were wet with tears. "He was taken 2 years ago for assessment. They told us he died. But he was here in your first group of rescues. Torin." She pressed a hand to her chest. "You kept him alive when I couldn't. When we all failed him. Torin." The 14-year-old with glasses and careful words. The boy who'd stood watch while others slept. The one who'd asked what we were going to do and trusted her to find an answer. "He saved himself," Emily said quietly. "I just gave him a safe place to land." "You gave him hope," the woman corrected. "You gave all of them hope. That's everything." As the woman walked away, Matthew pulled Emily close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "She's right, you know. You changed everything." "We changed everything," Emily corrected. "You're the one who actually had the power to make reforms." "I had power," Matthew interrupted. "You had courage. You went into the dead zone with nothing but determination and you kept 7 children alive. You stood between my guns and them like you actually thought you could stop me. You told the truth when lying would have been safer." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across the claiming mark he'd left 3 months ago. "I enforce laws, Emily. You remind me why those laws matter. We're better together." It was the closest he'd come to saying he loved her. They were still learning from each other, still figuring out how to be mates who were partners instead of just biology and political necessity. But the bond was there, solid and real, and every day it grew deeper. "I have something for you," Matthew said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Emily's breath caught. "Matthew. I know I already claimed you. I know the bond is sealed and you're stuck with me whether you like it or not. He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring engraved with wolf tracks. But you deserved better than a clinical bite at dawn to satisfy political necessity. You deserved romance and choice and someone actually asking instead of just taking. He met her eyes, and for once the Alpha King looked uncertain. So I'm asking, will you marry me? Not because the bond demands it, not because the kingdom expects it, but because I want to spend my life running through forests with you and arguing about policy reforms and watching you terrorize counselors who think Omegas should be silent and submissive. Emily laughed, the sound punching out of her chest like something wild and free. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. Is that a yes? That's a yes. She held out her hand, watching as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her. Like she'd been made for this. For him, for this life, for this impossible second chance. The wedding happened 2 weeks later in the palace gardens, witnessed by 7 children who'd survived impossible odds and hundreds of wolves who'd learned that strength wasn't about perfection but about protecting the vulnerable. Emily wore white and carried wildflowers from the forest where she'd hidden for so long. Matthew wore formal attire and looked uncomfortable with the ceremony but committed to the vows. They promised to protect each other, to challenge each other, to build a kingdom where no child would ever be thrown away for being different. And when he kissed her, the bond flared bright and certain, fated and chosen, inevitable and wanted, exactly as it should be. Afterward they ran. Not away from responsibility but toward freedom, shifting mid-stride and racing through the forest that surrounded the palace. Silver Alpha and smaller, scrappier Omega, running side by side under a moon that had witnessed too many horrors and was finally seeing something worth celebrating. Behind them, the palace glowed with light and laughter. Ahead, the future stretched uncertain and challenging. But they'd face it together. The ruthless king and the stubborn Omega, the warrior and the survivor, 2 broken pieces that had somehow fitted together into something stronger than either had been alone. In the dead zone, the cabin's ashes scattered on the wind, carrying stories of survival into the wilderness. In the palace, children laughed without fear for the first time in their lives. In the throne room, new counselors drafted laws that protected instead of punished. And in the forest, 2 wolves ran until they couldn't run anymore, then shifted back to human and fell into the snow laughing, breathless, alive. I never thanked you, Emily said, staring up at stars that seemed impossibly bright after years of seeing them through cabin cracks. For what? For believing me. For fighting for the children. For choosing me even when it would have been easier to look away. She turned her head to meet his eyes. For seeing worth where everyone else saw waste. Matthew pulled her close, warm despite the cold, solid despite the chaos they'd survived. I should be thanking you. You reminded me what it means to lead. Not just to maintain order but to create justice. Not just to enforce laws, but to protect the people those laws are supposed to serve. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. You made me a better king, Emily. And you made me want to deserve you. You already do, she whispered. Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. They lay there in the snow, 2 people who'd collided by fate and chosen each other by will, watching the stars wheel overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. More children to rescue, more corruption to root out, more wolves who resented the changes and would fight to restore the old order. But tonight they had this peace and partnership and the certainty that some battles were worth fighting, some truths were worth dying for, and some people, no matter how broken they seemed, were worth saving. Every lost pup had run to the rejected Omega. And the Alpha King had tracked her and learned the secret. Not that she was dangerous. Not that she was a criminal. Not that she was broken. But she was brave. And brilliant. And absolutely unstoppable. And exactly what his kingdom needed to survive the future. The secret was simple, really. The weakest among them were often the strongest. The rejected were often the most worthy. And sometimes, The people the world threw away were the only ones capable of changing it. Emily Hvidston, rejected Omega, sanctuary builder, queen, had proven that beyond any doubt. And Matthew Solberg, ruthless king, fated mate, partner, would spend the rest of his life making sure no one forgot it. Together, they rose and ran back toward the palace, toward the children waiting for them, toward the kingdom they were rebuilding one truth at a time. The dead zone was empty now. The cabin was ashes. The old world was burning. But from the ashes, something new was growing. Something worth fighting for. Something worth surviving for. Something worth living for. And they'd live it together, the Alpha King and his Omega Queen, protecting the vulnerable, challenging the powerful, and proving that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the courage to care. The Northern Territories would never be the same. And that, finally, was exactly as it should be. 1 year later. The nursery was painted in soft blues and silvers, moonlight streaming through windows that overlooked forests where Emily had once hidden and now ran free. She stood at the crib, watching the sleeping infant with a mixture of wonder and terror that parenthood brought. "She's perfect," Matthew murmured from the doorway. "She's ours," Emily corrected, still awed by the impossible reality. A year ago, she'd been convinced she'd never have children, never have a family, never have anything but survival and struggle. Now she had a mate, a crown, a kingdom to protect, and a daughter with silver eyes and a stubborn chin who'd already proven she had both parents' determination. "What are you thinking?" Matthew asked, crossing to wrap his arms around her waist. "That I'm terrified I'll mess this up. That she'll grow up and realize her mother was just a rejected Omega pretending to know what she's doing. That I'm not enough." "Stop." Matthew turned her to face him, his hands gentle but firm. "You kept 7 children alive in the dead zone with almost nothing. You exposed a conspiracy that powerful wolves wanted buried. You stood in front of the High Council and told the truth when they wanted you silent." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're not pretending to know what you're doing. You're doing it. And our daughter is going to grow up knowing that her mother is the bravest person in the kingdom." "Second bravest," Emily corrected. Torin organized a protest last week against discriminatory assessment practices. At 14. "He's braver than both of us." Matthew laughed quietly. "He learned from the best." In the crib, their daughter stirred, making small sounds of complaint that would escalate to full crying if they didn't act fast. Emily scooped her up, marveling at how something so small could feel so monumentally important. "You know what the best part is?" she asked as the baby settled against her shoulder. "What?" "She gets to grow up in a world where being different isn't a death sentence. Where children are protected instead of discarded. Where worth isn't determined by genetics or strength, but by character and courage." Emily met Matthew's eyes. "She gets to grow up safe. Because we made it safe." "We did," Matthew agreed. "And we'll keep making it safer. For her. For all of them." Outside the window, the Northern Territory stretched vast and wild, a kingdom slowly healing from old wounds. 7 children slept in rooms down the hall, no longer refugees but family. Wolves across the territory were learning new laws, new values, new ways of measuring worth. It wasn't perfect. Change never was. But it was better. And tomorrow they'd still make it better still. Because that's what survivors did. They didn't just endure. They transformed. They built. They created futures worth fighting for. And Emily Hvidston, rejected Omega, warrior queen mother, had proven that sometimes the people the world throws away are exactly the ones who'll save it.
Like and subscribe if you enjoy watching this story. See you on the next one.